Alejandro Cadena. Welcome to the Map It Forward podcast, as well as the Love and Other Delusions podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Dee, for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Thank you. We connected recently over an article that you wrote that's available. Links are in the show notes for everyone that wants to check this out. But I really connected with your sentiment behind the article. You are the CEO of Caravela, a green importing company and exporting company, correct?
Yes. We do both things. We export coffee from 7 countries in Latin America, and then we import. We have import operations in 4 locations. Australia is one of them. We have an office in Sydney, in Manly, to be exact.
Not a terrible part of
Uh,
the world at all.
Not at all. No, it's been a while since I have been able to be there, but yes, it's beautiful. It's in a park on the top of
Mm,
Mount. It's quite beautiful. We also have offices in the US, in London, and in Taiwan.
yeah, great. So, why don't you tell everyone what this article is about and what led to it? We're in very, very interesting times in the coffee industry.
We are indeed in very interesting times. I've been in the industry for about 21 years, although I would say that I've been part of the coffee world since I was born.
Hmm.
My father used to work at the National Coffee Growers Federation of Colombia. And so, my life has revolved about around coffee. I always joke that, I got my education thanks to coffee growers. They paid for
Oh,
my
wow.
father's salary, and therefore I am a product of coffee growers' hard work in Colombia.
Mm,
Um, I After graduating from college, I studied economics here in Colombia, and then I went to do some investment banking, both in New York and in London, and got very frustrated at the end with all the politics that was involved. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur from very early on in my, I remember in my teens, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And surprisingly, I got invited by a friend of mine from college to be part of Caravela. He was just starting the company and was looking to get into the coffee business. He knew that my dad had worked at the FNC, and so he said, "Well, you should know about coffee." And I didn't. I didn't really know. I knew that it was a tree, and there was cherries, and you process it. I was probably more advanced than most people, but I didn't know about the trade of coffee. Um, but it was an interesting proposition. So I became a shareholder in the company, and we started looking at the coffee market because I did know, I remember my dad going to one of those SCA shows probably 30 years ago and talking about specialty coffee and, you know, getting to know. But I said, we need to really understand the market because one thing that I do know it's a industry that is known for big coffee traders. Like,
mm,
these are very powerful coffee traders. So, small company cannot compete with the small traders. But I've heard about this concept of coffee, and so I told them, why don't just do some market research before diving into the coffee sector. We might lose a lot of money. So let's do the research. And we were very fortunate to be living in London at the time, so we were able to talk to a few roasters. One of those very initial roasters with Monmouth Coffee, which you might have heard.
I used to work in the London coffee scene at London Bridge, which is where Monmouth
Well,
was.
there
So
you
I'm well
go.
aware. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Anita Leroy was kind of an inspiration because
Yeah.
she was that pioneer that was selling single origins and farm specific, and she always had a queue out the door, and it was fascinating to be in that place at that time because we really got to really understand what the hardcore specialty movement was at the moment.
Yeah.
And talking to her and to a few other people, we realized that what was lacking was uh, a good price for coffee. There was there were a few early pioneers that wanted to pay a good price for coffee. Anita had started her business in 1978, so she had seen that the huge prices that we saw in the 90s,
Mm,
and so for her, paying good money for coffee was not something that she hadn't seen before.
mm.
On the contrary, she was actually seeing how prices were going down and the quality was suffering as a consequence of
Yeah.
the low prices that we were seeing in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so, but she always complained that one of the biggest hurdles was, I don't know if the money is going to the farmer. when I buy from estates, I do.
Fair
I
question.
can talk. I talk to those farmers, but I don't when I buy from small farmers. And the reality is that most coffee producing countries are filled with tiny smallholder farmers that are producing wonderful coffee,
Mm.
but I can't buy that coffee. And so that helped us realize that we needed to build a model that would benefit the small farmers by paying them a good price for the highest qualities, but also ensuring that the buyer, the roasters that were buying the coffee, were were that the farmers that they were buying from through us were getting a fair deal. And
Mm.
that's how we started. We initially we wanted to work with exporters in Colombia. That wasn't possible. They were still dinosaurs that wanted to do everything the old way. Why change it if it works, right? And to me that was frustrating. So I quit my job and I came back to Colombia to kind of let's figure out let's get coffee from these small farmers. And actually, initially, we were trying to say, well, let's start with the big farms, right? It's easier to start with big farms. It turned out that the big farms had pretty mediocre quality, but when we started looking at the small farms, they had really amazing quality. So
Yeah, wow.
that's when we started to say, hey, let's focus on the small farmer and develop a model that actually gives that traceability and that transparency to the whole supply chain, not only to the roasters but also to the smallholder farmer that was being paid very little money for their coffee. They were not being incentivized for quality at all. It was just sell coffee, we'll mix it, and in the end in the mill, we'll figure it out. We'll find the specialty will be found at the mill. And I was kind of like, what do you mean? It's the farmer that's doing the job.
Yeah, hit and miss.
Right. It was like finding a needle in a haystack. It was
Mm.
literally that way. And we were called crazy at the beginning because we said, you have to cup every single bean, not every single bean, but every single lot
Lot.
to actually separate the good from the bad.
Yeah.
That's the way you get consistent quality, and you can repeat this because, of course, roasters wanted that relationship a while. They didn't want to just buy coffee. They wanted to buy coffee from somebody, from a
Yeah.
specific group of
They
farmers,
want the
right?
story associated with it.
Right, right. And so that's how you develop the model, and it was wonderful. I went from being in a corporate world where money was the only object, right? Just make as much money as we can, to being in an industry that at that time was changing the world. They wanted to change the world. They really understood that if they continued to pay low prices, the coffee that they so much loved would never be found again. And it
Mm.
was inspirational. It was, you know, I went from, five-star hotels, the swanky life of the investment banker to an unpaid coffee industry professional, learning how to cup, going to the far off places, and really meeting wonderful people, both on the origin and on the roasting side. And that was, I didn't care I was
Delightful,
making
I'm
any
sure.
money. Yeah, it was
Invigorating.
transformative.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for the first 5 years, it was like that. Everybody you met, yeah, I want to find these farmers that are doing good. I want to pay them well. I still remember one SEA show where Dwayne Sorensen from Stumptown went to an audience and said, I want to pay top dollars for the coffee. I want to pay the. And everybody was like, yeah, was cheering for Dwayne. Yeah, honestly, it's
No, I
like,
believe you. I
wow,
believe you.
this guy was saying, I'll pay whatever it takes to get the best coffee.
Okay.
There was there was no there was no limit to the prices that they would pay, and that was
Mm.
that was kind of the word that you got from buyers back in early 2000. And then came the 2010, 2011, and things started to change.
Mm. How
Uh,
so?
you know, well, there was the romanticism that we saw in the early days kind of started to dwindle.
The reality
Um,
of business started to kick in?
well, I wouldn't say the reality of business because, I'll be honest, Caravela didn't make any money in the first 10 years.
Mm. Standard for every business. As much as people would like to think that, you're buying Ferraris within 24 minutes of opening a business, it's nothing like what people think.
Yeah, it took me 20 years to get the same salary I was
Yeah?
making in
Oh,
2001.
I believe you. I'm an
And
entrepreneur myself, so I absolutely believe that.
I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm happier. But so it's not just the business. It's something changed, and I think it's kind of, maybe the leadership got tired. Yeah,
When
tough
you,
life.
can I ask, when you say the leadership, which leadership do you refer to? Because this is
Well,
something that fascinates me in our industry. Who's leading?
that's the point. There were some leaders back then, right? In the early 2000s, there was 3, 4, 5 companies, mostly in the US. I would say Anita from Monmouth was another one of those pioneers in the UK.
Mark
Australia came
Dundon.
in a little later. Mark Dundon came in like 2009, 2010. I remember, entertaining Mark around 2009 in Colombia. But it was different as well. Australia in 2009 had, you were rich.
Ooh,
The exchange rate was like 110.
right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I remember Australians coming here in 2009. Like, yeah, I'll pay for.
Yeah.
What about 5? Yeah.
Yeah.
Money was
But
not a
our
problem.
coffee drinking culture here is so much, like the specialty coffee scene here is 20 years ahead of the US, only because here we socialize children into drinking coffee from a young age, and they're drinking specialty coffee from a younger age.
Yes, but despite that, we do very good business in Australia. I
Mm.
think we have a great customers in Australia. But the even then, 2009 to 2012, 13, Australians would be the biggest payers. They would buy a cup of excellence lot. They would just,
Yeah.
give me everything. Price was no issue. And then things started to change again in Australia. Of course, the exchange rate collapsed.
Yeah.
But let's look at the US. They
Mm-hmm.
don't suffer from the exchange rate movements, and even though they don't suffer them, everybody started around that time as well to find cheaper coffee.
Mm.
And I was in 2010 working with one of these big roasters, pioneer roasters in the US, and all of a sudden they started rejecting everything that we sent them
Why do you think that is?
because the price was too high.
But what's the reason behind the price is too high? Because we know that's never really the problem.
Agreed, but that was the argument. Coffee was getting too expensive. Like, is I can't imagine that coffee is just getting too expensive. Something else is happening, and to be honest, I think everybody who said I need to have a better life, right? Um, they wanted to have, they were 10, 15 years running their businesses, just like me, just making enough for a living. And they said, I have this great brand. I have this great reputation
I
now in the
don't want to
market.
fight anymore.
I don't want to fight anymore. I can pay whatever. I'm
Yeah.
going to buy whatever coffee because my brand is more important than the product itself.
It shouldn't have taken this long for us to have won this battle against low prices. We're still not winning it. So let's just go the easy option because I want to cash out in 5 years from now.
Yes. And just so that those leaders, well, the fact is, we don't have any more leaders.
No,
We're all followers, right?
not all
There's
of
just
us.
following well,
Let's
most.
But that you're 700% correct there. This is an industry that runs on fads, and
Right.
that's what's frustrating. We have, this was why your article resonated so much with me, was because what you're saying is we have to seize this moment. This is a moment for leadership. This is a moment where we can change the trajectory of our industry if we seize this moment.
Right. And that's why, it's a pivotal moment. I think instead of going the opposite, when prices go up, people tend to say, well, I have to buy cheaper coffee. And I think it's the contrary. It's a perfect moment to talk to consumers and say, this is what's happening in this industry. And it's not just, not just the farmer that needs to benefit. Of course he needs to benefit, but we all need to benefit.
Yeah, the whole
Because
supply chain is suffering.
If we continue with cafe, and I think you had I listened to a podcast from you that you said that most coffee businesses don't make money.
Yeah.
It's and that's the truth. Yeah, most coffee shops don't make it. Most roasters don't make money.
No.
But why don't they make money? Not because I think people say there's too much competition, but that's not the problem.
No, it's not the
Competition
problem.
actually drives prices up, not down.
Yeah. The business model is broken.
Yes, yes, and that's why I think I wanted to in the end say it's a moment that we have to pivot and really start to think, what is specialty really?
That's the question, right?
Is it just a nice packaging? Is it nice, really nice coffee shops with swanky espresso machines? I go to Korea and I see those swanky espresso machines and swanky shops, and then I taste the coffee and I say, ooh, is it just an image?
Yeah, is it just a score out of 100?
Right, right. So whatever it is, it's the sustainability of what we call specialty, what is at stake. Because if we don't change, we don't pivot out of this kind of conundrum that we've been in for the last 10 years, we're just going to be another one. Yeah. And we'll end up, we won't end up making the difference that we were starting to do or were aiming to do 20 years ago. We've lost our sight on that mission.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, it's been very frustrating in the last 2 or 3 years. Like, why we keep chasing the bottom instead of trying to elevate the product? Why do we keep comparing ourselves with wine? That's a terrible comparison. It's a completely different business. Just the fact that you can just pour it out of the bottle makes it very different from coffee.
Well, also the wine industry has invested heavily in making it an elitist product.
Right.
They've done well at that, and the effects of wine are much more obvious on someone's consciousness, and so therefore they can connect that to good times and happy times. And it's something that I do when I'm in the evening just chilling out with people, and I can get very expensive and I can get very cheap wines and etc. etc. There's a wine for every different occasion. We've done a terrible job of doing that in coffee.
I agree. I completely agree. We haven't communicated properly what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I was reading this morning an article saying that the wine consumption in France has gone from something like 130 liters a year to 40 liters a year in 100 years.
Why has that happened?
I don't know. I just read part of the article. There was no. I have to buy the book to actually read it.
Yeah.
But I was like, wow, this is an interesting fact, And you look at that and wait a minute. I did say that we can't lose some customers, right? I did say in the articles that maybe
Absolutely.
we have to lose some customers.
Yeah.
But wine hasn't gone.
No.
Hasn't been cheaper.
No, they just raise the prices, and this is the important thing that happens when you have an industry that has a very low barrier to entry with regards to business ownership. Because the barrier to entry requires you just to have access to capital to start the business. It doesn't require you to understand the origins of the complex agricultural product that you're dealing in. It doesn't require you to understand how coffee is traded. It doesn't require you to understand how your influence in the supply chain could have ramifications and ripple effects back through the supply chain. None of that is a requirement. And because of the perception that, well, so many people are opening cafes, it must be profitable.
Yeah. And look at Starbucks, right?
Well, yeah, look, you know how many people in all of my consulting work that I do in the industry, you know how many people keep telling me, I'm going to be the next Starbucks. And I'm like, you've no idea what you're taking on board. I just want you to be a successful cafe. Let's just start at that. A successful cafe that's aiming towards 15% net profit without sacrificing their cogs and looking for other alternatives than the easy way out. By cutting your cogs as a way of getting profitable. There are better ways to do it. But it's the long game, right? It's the harder route, and people don't want to do it. Most people are so shocked when they get into the cafe game and they realize, one, how hard they have to work, and two, how little money there is in it. They were expecting a Porsche by the end of the first year.
That's not going to happen. I do say to everybody, coffee is not, if you want to be rich, don't get into coffee.
Not at all. at any
There are
point of
many
the
other
coffee
stuff.
game.
Yeah,
No, no.
that's not even if you're a farmer, not even if you're a coffee shop or a roaster or an importer or an exporter. You're not going to be that rich because
No.
that's not what coffee is all about.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's a realization that most people don't understand. Is not you have to have a purpose, and your purpose is not money.
You're speaking my
That
language right now, my friend.
and you look at most businesses that have a purpose, and they actually make money because
Yeah.
they connect with people.
Yeah. A
But
hundred
your
percent
purpose is
agree.
not making money, because if your purpose is making money, then you're not going to connect with people.
No, not at all. And it's not going to, being in business is hard. It's so fucking hard. And so if you're not extracting joy that parallels that level of hard, the money's not going to mean anything.
Right? Or you're making too much money, but you're really going to get very, very, very um, it's not going to last. You're going to burn
Yeah,
yourself out really hard.
absolutely. And it ends up costing you, and not from a financial perspective, but the journey ends up costing you way more than you've earned.
Your family, your
Your
friends, your
relationships,
relationships. Yeah.
your mental health, your physical health, all of that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, like with what's been happening for producers over the last decade or so and longer, I mean, you were talking about how in 2011, 2010, 2011, it started to just get a bit tiring for people on the consuming end to really push this agenda for producers. On the producing end, they must be utterly exhausted by having to fight up against these ups and downs of the sea market.
Yes and no, and that's the beauty of working with coffee farmers is
Mm-hmm.
you meet very humble people. They're gracious.
Mm.
They might not have money or food on the table, but when you go visit them, they throw out everything they have
Yeah.
and so that graciousness, and the fact that they've lived with very little money and they still do it means that they actually love it, right?
Yeah.
You don't persist in something if you don't like what you're doing. And I don't see any business or any profession that you just keep doing it just because you have to, right? Especially not these days with there's many options for people, right? Not only in Australia but everywhere. In Colombia,
Mm.
people can do something else. And usually those farmers, the ones that really love what they do, they're also the best producers, the ones that have the best quality.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
so you see it even in coffee farmers. You see that parallel with people that actually do it because they love what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Their product is superior than the rest, even though they don't have the same money as the big guys. That was a big realization when I started looking for those big estates in Colombia and realizing that they didn't have the quality. And then I met these poor farmers producing amazing quality, and nobody was paying them good money back then, and they were still producing great quality. And what
Pride
was
in their
different was
work.
was that they really loved what they do, and
Mm.
and that's why very early on in my career I said there's no specialty coffee. What is specialty coffee producers? That's what makes the difference. It's
Can
not the coffee.
I got to ask you a question as an entrepreneur, you as Alejandro, not as the CEO of Caravela. When you go from being a banker to being somebody who is touching the earth on a regular basis and dealing with farmers and producers who live a very humble lifestyle, what does that do to your consciousness?
Well, it made me a much better person. Just seeing people, flesh and blood, like people
Mm.
that are real people, humble people, people that live on very few things.
Yeah.
It made me realize that I was completely privileged first, and I
Right.
was I was a I was a very stupid person before, you live you were basically living just to make money, and
Yeah.
these people were living just to survive, to
Mm.
completely different perspective, right?
It's
And
humbling.
I was like coming to them, and they were gracious, they were open. At the beginning, there was no hotels. You go to coffee regions, and there was no hotels. There was very poor regions. and I would be invited to sleep at their homes, and they would actually give me their sons or daughters' bedroom, and I would sleep there. And I would wake up, and they would have a huge breakfast for me, and I was like, wow,
And you know
you
they
know,
don't
I
have money.
yes, but they were being gracious, and they were being kind,
Mm.
and they would open their house to me, a complete stranger.
Yeah.
So
This
that
makes
was
a
that
lot
was a
of sense. This
humbling
is
experience.
my family are farmers in Syria. My mother's family. And I remember going to Syria for the first time. And even when we would go and visit another city, there's a lot of ancient ruin cities in Syria, and we would go there. And our guide that we just hired for the day would, when we would say, oh, okay, it's time to go and have lunch, he would say, no, I told my wife to prepare a lunch. She's gone and bought meat. And we know that they don't have money for meat. But his wife has gone and spent their last money on a meal with meat in it. Um, and it's ready at their house for us. They welcomed us into their house. This was the standard kind of hospitality in the Middle East. And it
Hmm.
started to bend my brain about the privilege that I had, even at 14 years old, of being somebody who could just go and buy a burger whenever I wanted. And these people would sacrifice their the rest of the money that they had just to welcome guests that they'd never met before into their own home.
Hmm. Yeah, same experience.
Yeah,
These were completely gracious, humble.
yeah,
Uh, it was transformative. Even my wife, says, you changed for the good, for the better.
really.
Yes.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So now we find ourselves in a very interesting, pivotal moment where there's interesting things happening in Colombia politically that
Hmm.
affect coffee producers, and there's climate issues happening as well as political issues happening in Brazil that are affecting both of those two in the top three coffee producing regions in the world at a moment in history where we have a number of other constraints that are really stress testing the coffee supply chain. We have shipping issues, we have container issues, we have inflationary issues, we have increases in inputs and challenges of getting inputs into farms becoming a real stressor for producers. And on the consumer end of the market, we have massive labor shortages, which are preventing businesses from being open at full capacity. We have
Hmm.
lockdowns all over the world because of the pandemic. We have logistical issues in coffee producing countries. We have trucker strikes in Brazil happening at the same time as the frost issues that are happening. We are definitely in a very interesting time in the coffee supply chain right now.
In the world, I would say,
Yes.
it's not just affecting coffee; it's
Yeah.
affecting the whole world. But isn't it a message to all of us that things
I
need to
absolutely
change?
agree. This is this is why another reason your article resonated with me was because people are looking at this as a, a time that could it's a bad thing that's happening for our industry. And your article really resonated the thoughts and the things that we've been talking about on the podcast, in that this is going to separate the wheat from the chaff. And this is a moment where if we capitalize on the conscious shifting in consumer behavior, there's a thin veil and a thin window actually that exists right now for us to say to consumers,
Mhm.
coffee prices at the cup level, at the roasted coffee level, are going to have to go up. And this is why they're going up. We're not putting them up simply because of one thing. It's not just going up because of inflation. We need to tell you a story.
Mhm. Yeah, engage with consumers. Another thing that changed dramatically is back then in the 2000s, there was a lot of focus on engaging with the
Mm,
consumer and explaining to him why this was different. And they would teach people, they would do like small seminars. I remember Stumptown had the annex in Portland where they
mm,
actually were
I've been there.
teaching
Yeah, yeah.
consumers. I don't know if that exists in Finland. I don't think
I
it
don't
does,
think so.
but
I'm not sure.
but back then there was a focus on engaging with consumers, right? And engaging is not just, here's my coffee, taste it. It was like explaining the whole thing, and really educating consumers in a good sense of why coffee was different, why this coffee was different than the rest, right? This is Nescafe, this is not Nespresso, this is not your average cup of Joe, this is something that has a lot more than just taste, right? And that has stopped for the most part. I don't see roasters doing any of that. I don't know if it's because consumers say I'm not interested.
Do you think that coffee has a branding issue? What I mean by that, we call instant coffee coffee. We call espresso coffee. We call roasted coffee coffee. We call high end specialty coffee for $100 a cup coffee.
I haven't never thought about that. Maybe you're right. I think that's why we use the term specialty, but that doesn't mean anything
It
today,
doesn't
right?
mean anything anymore anyway. People, I mean, at the end of it, I think that was the original intention behind creating the term specialty coffee, so it could be separated out. But I think consumers are confused by what coffee means.
Yes and no, because I do think that consumers are never stupid. You show
You
them,
sure about that?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't think consumers are stupid.
How many? I did a survey when I was working in a cafe in San Diego, and I asked a simple question: where does coffee come from?
But that's not being stupid.
Eight
That's
out of
that's
10 consumers didn't know that coffee came from a tree.
that's ignorance more than anything else. But that's
There's
that's
a
part
fine
of the
line.
problem.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's part of the problem. And I was the other day I was interviewed for an article about the 100% Colombian coffee campaign, which started in the 60s, and I was revisiting the campaign and everything, and I thought that was brilliant. It actually showed for the first time to consumers that coffee came from trees and that was picked by hand.
Yeah.
We should do that. Why
Yes.
don't why don't we do that?
Well,
It's
because
actually
people think coffee is when it comes. Most consumers drink it out of a tin that's granules, and they just add water.
yeah.
So we've removed the. It's like when people look at a steak and don't know, they disconnect from the fact that it comes from a cow. So we've
Right,
done
but
the
look at
same thing.
wine. Look at wine. Just pour it from the bottle, and yet consumers.
They've done a great job though. There's vineyards are all over the bottles, they're all over the marketing. They've romanticized winemaking.
That is one thing. I do think that there is a difference, in the fact that wine comes from the first world. Most
Right.
wine comes from first world.
Yeah.
So there is that connection. It
Yeah,
is,
I'd never thought about it that
California
way.
wine,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
French wine, Italian wine.
Yeah.
There's an arrogance in the origin, right?
Yeah, I'd never thought about it
So I
that way.
so I think that also makes a big difference. We've been used, and when I say we, consumers in the developed world have been used that these products come from second world
Yeah.
countries, from rich
Of
countries, while
coffee.
these others come from poor
Poor
countries.
countries.
So of course I can pay less, right? Because everything
Yeah,
that
I'd
comes from
never
poor
thought about
countries
it
pays
that
less.
way.
Yes,
Yeah.
even though it might be, it's not evident, it's not something that you do consciously, it's unconscious. But that's what we've told, right? Things that come from
Mm,
China are bad, are cheap and bad, right?
right.
That's a stigma that poor countries have, and because they come from poor countries, they must be cheap. But if they come from the first world, then they're expensive.
So
And,
if we
and
grow coffee, go ahead.
just look at how big brands do it.
Mm,
Even though the handbag might be made in China, but finished in France, they say it's made in
made in
France.
France.
They would not
Oh
dare
yeah.
to say it's made in China,
No.
even though it is.
And I'm just thinking about like what are some of the richer coffee producing countries? You look at Kona coffee, you look at any coffee that's grown and sold in Australia or in California. All of those coffees, green, I mean, Kona coffee selling for an average of $60 a pound. But that's
Yes.
because it's in a rich country.
Yeah.
Californian coffee, the same. All of that coffee is above $20 a pound.
Hmm. Yeah. And you even might argue the same about Panamanian coffee.
Yep, it was
Even though
Panama.
it's
Yeah,
Panamanian coffee is technically in Latin America, most of the farmers in Panama are descendants from
expats.
Americans and from expats, right? So
Hmm.
it's perceived
A
as
wealthier
very
country.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a wealthier country.
yeah.
So
I've never thought
consumer
of it that way.
perception of where it comes from is also important. And there's a devaluation because it comes from a poor country than it comes from a rich country.
Mm.
And that's something that needs to change. It doesn't have to be because it comes from a country that is less expensive. Products have to be less expensive. And
Yeah,
and I think one great example is Apple. iPhones are made in China, and they do say made in China, but designed in California, of course, right? But those products are not cheap, even though they're made in China.
mm.
Why can Apple get away with it, and why we can't?
Well, branding. This is why I keep going back to I think coffee has a branding problem.
Oh yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that what you've definitely given me something to chew on there is does the branding issue stem from the origin of where the product comes from? And you know, this constant thing that people say about, well, labor's cheaper in those countries, so that's why the product has to be cheaper. Well, just because the labor's cheaper, it doesn't mean we're paying a fair price for it.
right, right. And again, the great example is Apple.
Mm.
Those phones are made in China, and everybody knows they're made in China,
Yeah.
and yet they're really expensive,
Not only are they really expensive, people renew them every year.
and they're willing to pay whatever it
Yeah.
takes,
Yeah.
right?
Apple have done an amazing job at the branding.
Right. And Nike as well. The shoes they're also made in China or now Vietnam, but they're also a brand power that is able to charge a lot of money. Why can't coffee do the same? Why do we have to exploit the farmer?
Right.
And we don't have to. We don't have to exploit the farmer, and we don't have to make little money.
And
Nobody
we
has
don't have to
to,
screw the
to
consumer
lose.
either.
Right. Nobody has to lose. It can be a win-win-win proposition. But we have to stop that mentality that somebody has to lose. For
Right.
me to make money, somebody has to lose.
It's this famine or feast kind of mentality in particularly at the consuming end of the market, whereby if somebody else is winning more than me, uh, then I could potentially lose even more than I'm currently losing. There's so many consumers in coffee. You just have to figure out what who your consumer is, and stop being attached to the fact that I have to sell as much as I can, and go for the volume for less profit. These people who are like, oh well, I've got millions of dollars coming through the cash register, and so therefore I must be making money.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Yeah.
have to wait till tax time before, because they don't know how to read their profit and loss statement. They wait till tax time before they realize that they're making -2%, and they're not costing their products out properly. This is, I mean, it's such a flow on effect from people from a low barrier to entry into our market.
Yeah. That doesn't help either. The fact that it's a low barrier to entry and that anybody that just likes coffee can set up a roastery or a cafe doesn't help. And that's where also I think we need to do better. How do we educate those people better? And people like you, consultants that can do a better job of saying, hey,
Mm.
this is what you're getting into. Are you ready? Or not?
Oh, yeah, I
Because
spend most of my time convincing people not to do it, or to at least wait 12 months. That my approach to them is I want you to go and get a job as a barista for 7 days a week, and just do that
well,
for 3 months. And they're like, why would I do something so crazy? I'm like, because that's exactly what your life is going to be like when you run your own cafe. You will be
mhm,
working 7 days a week, you will be working for minimum wage, and you're also expecting your staff to do this. If you believe that it's acceptable for you to do it, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Oh,
But
that's
if you,
great. That's great. When I started, I had to do everything.
yeah,
And believe me, I was happy learning. it was like, wow,
oh, you get
this is
drunk
this
off
is
it,
a
don't you?
yeah. And thankfully, I don't have to do it now, and I have a great team behind me.
Yeah,
But it took me to do it myself, to learn how to do it,
yeah,
and then teach the rest of the people how to do that.
yeah. So if we go back to what was at the core of what created, I guess, the stimulus for your article, it's the recent frost situations that have happened in Brazil, as well as some of the stuff that's been going on in Colombia. Where do we see what's happening now taking us into the next 2 years if nothing changes? If we don't get consumers in on a better trajectory for better prices?
Well, there's kind of two options for the industry. I do think that prices will remain relatively high, at least for the next year or so. It's not going to be as a quick fall as early years, because we've come from a drought that already made
Yep.
some problems in this year's harvest. Now we had these two frosts, which will impact next year's harvest, and we're still waiting to see what happens with the drought. Will it continue?
Yeah.
And if it continues, then this is going to impact not only 22, 23, but also 23, 24 harvest in Brazil.
Right.
So there's too much uncertainty in the coffee world for prices to really decline very fast. I think we'll stay very close to two in at least in the next year or so. And so there's two options for coffee businesses. Either they go looking for cheaper coffee to compensate for the extra cost of goods. Coffee was half a year ago,
Yeah.
half the price. So I have to increase my prices by double. No, you don't. The price of coffee is not 100% of the final product
Right.
price. It is for green coffee traders, but it
Yep.
isn't for coffee shops or for roasters. So there's two options. Either they go looking for cheaper coffee. They do the same thing that happened in 2010. I already have a brand. I already have a following, consumers, so they won't know the difference. If I choose cheaper coffee, they won't know the difference, right? That's what they think. I don't agree. I think consumers do taste the difference.
Uh,
Maybe not in cappuccinos.
well, yeah, that's the issue right there. Having been a barista for 15 years, um, the one thing that I can tell you is that people notice the difference in the coffee that they drink. So if they're drinking a cappuccino with 2 sugars, which a lot of people do, they know when their cappuccino with 2 sugars changes. They know when
There
you've
you go.
got less. If you put one less sugar, they'll look at you and say, Lee, are you sure you put 2 sugars in here?
See, they're not stupid.
And they'll say to you, you didn't stir my coffee, did you? Like they'll know that. I mean, it's been 5 years, 6 years since I've been a barista, but that was consistent for the whole 15 years that I was a barista.
Yeah, no,
People know
I
the
can tell
difference in
you.
their coffee.
I can tell you. When this happened in Sydney a few years back.
Mm.
We have an office in Sydney, so we have some accountants. Swanky CBD accountants.
Yep.
And so we go meet the lady that is running our account, and we had met her 3 or 4 times before, and she said, "I love the cafe that I have in front of me. I go there after lunch every day." And the first thing we sit down that day, and she says, "They changed my coffee in the cafe in front." Like, I was like,
This is this is what I mean by Aussie coffee drinkers. If you change the roaster that you're using without telling your customers, you could end up going out of business.
right. Well, this wasn't actually a change of roaster. They changed my coffee. The
Yeah.
roaster was the same. They
Yeah.
changed my
Well.
coffee, and I was like, "Wow, you noticed?" Of course, I noticed. I go there every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So consumers do taste the difference. I think
Yep.
most business owners don't think so.
Yeah. Well, and also here, it consumers are very fickle because of all the options available to them. So, and that's changing because we're now in lockdown. We're 5 weeks into what could end up being, will definitely be at least a 10-week lockdown. And
Hmm.
people are assuming that we could be here till Christmas.
Yeah.
And our industry has been devastated by it here. And so people are being forced to go into different consuming habits when it goes to coffee. People on average buy 3 coffees a day. Whatever they drink, they usually buy 3 from their cafe a day. And
Wow.
here, it's just a part of what you do. And so we're under the challenge. So as a barista, if we just simply change the blend that we used, we had to give consumers 2 weeks notice and constantly reinforce them and let them know we haven't changed roasters, we haven't changed anything. It's just we're moving to a different blend because we think this tastes better with what we're offering. We'd still lose some customers. Now what we're finding is that the CBD region has completely shut down. Those cafes are likely never to be able to reopen again. People moving into their neighborhood cafes and having to readapt to new consuming habits. This is a real opportunity for people to capitalize on that moment of starting to re-engage with a whole new customer base. But if we miss this moment, that's the point of your article.
That's the point. That's the point. This is the moment. If
Yeah.
there's a moment, it's now. It's now. Not only you have a price, a commodity price that is going up, and not only coffee, everything is going up,
Everything's
right?
going up.
But there's also the moment where people are saying, well, I'm fighting for equality. I'm fighting for all these things. I'm actually, I think humanity is fighting for survival in reality,
I
right?
agree.
That's what's happening, right? So isn't this the perfect time to introduce the concept of saying, let's all change this for the better, where we all win?
Yeah. And don't be scared of selling less.
Right.
This is the thing that's really frustrating. People keep saying, but I'm going to sell less coffee. That's okay. At least you know that every coffee you sell is engaging in the supply chain well, first of all. You're not doing any damage. And second of all, you're profiting off every coffee you sell. Right now,
Right.
you're not quite sure of that. Right now, when you're selling a latte for $3.50, the profit that you're making is 15 cents. Here in Sydney, that's the realistic numbers. So if you give away one coffee, let's say each staff member gives away a free coffee every hour, you're going to get to the end of the day net negative. And most cafes don't know that.
Yeah,
So
I agree. So this is the time, and everybody has to win. And you communicate that to your customers. You say, we're changing this because that's the new reality, and we are trying to do what's better for everybody, even you,
yeah.
even the customer.
What do you think that that consuming end business owners need to start telling their customers about producers?
I'm not sure we have to talk about producers. We have to talk about the product itself and what, the whole complication about the product. It's not just the producer. The producer is one aspect, of course, he's suffering, but if the producer is suffering, the farm workers are suffering, the community is suffering, and everybody in the supply chain ends up suffering, because in the end, if that producer is not making a living, we're not going to have coffee in 20 years time, or we're just going to have to buy Brazilian coffee.
I love that answer. Well, there might not be that much Brazilian coffee left to buy
Well,
after the trees all die from the last 3 frost events. We don't know.
then Vietnamese.
Well, yeah, Vietnamese and then Colombian and then China's going to show up and say, "Hey, we've got
Right.
lots of coffee for you to consume." It's going to be an interesting few years in our industry.
I hope so. I really do hope so, that we start asking those questions, and the hard questions, not the easy. Which packaging should I use? Should I buy La Marzocco or Victoria Arduino? Those are not hard questions that we need to be asking ourselves.
No.
We need to be asking questions: how do we make the pivotal change that will ensure that the livelihood of all the industry, not just the farmers, but everybody else? No, I'm sure that a lot of cafe owners are suffering at the moment, but we need to make sure that those cafe owners are also able to make a living, right?
Oh, 100%. I'm hearing you say all those things, and one question comes to mind: who's responsible for this? And what I mean by that, it goes back to our statement of there isn't any leadership. who's responsible for making sure that our industry is healthy?
It's a great question. I wrote the article because I said I'm fed up of staying shut, not saying it, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in my company would say, "Ooh, you're alienating our customers."
Not at all.
Why
Not at all.
we should we tell them what they should be doing in their business? We should never tell our customers how to run their business. That's not the intent of the article. The intent of the article is to engage in this discussion within the industry.
Well, and it's worked. Look, we're here having a conversation about it.
Right, and that I hope many more people
Yeah.
start asking the questions and the hard questions, and I hope we start looking at other industries, not just ourselves, because I do think that the coffee industry has an insularity issue.
Yeah, I
we
would
think
agree
we're so cool.
100% on that.
we're cool, right? We're cool, and so we only bounce back ideas with coffee folks, right? And we see each other at SEAs or MICE, and we're so happy to see our industry, but are we learning anything from other industries? And that's why I tried to do the analogy with the coffee, the car industry.
Yeah.
The car industry had a huge issue. Oil prices went from 2 to 30 in the course of a year.
Yeah.
And what did they do? They made innovative cars that have more features, so that your cost of gas goes per mile goes lower. They didn't go the other trying to do less better cars. They want to do better cars.
Right. I guess they added more value.
Right.
that they, and this leads me to a conversation we were recently having at the Sydney Coffee Town Hall, where somebody said, I can't put my prices up because my consumers won't pay for it. And then somebody in the audience or somebody in the room said, just add more value. Make sure that what you're charging feels like it's less than the amount of value that they're getting. So if you're over delivering on value, it doesn't matter what you charge people. It will be worth it.
Right. People
you may sell
value
less of it, but the people who, you got to find a way to sell less that's enough to cover what you need to make. But therein lies the problem. People don't want to have to work hard for that.
Yeah, maybe that's that. Maybe it's also the fact that nobody's willing to raise prices. I was looking at the other day, I think it was Friday, I got an email from a coffee analyst, a beverage analyst in the US from Rabobank, and he was showing the increase in prices in soft drinks and wine and other beverages, and comparing it to coffee. And the only industry that is not raising prices is coffee.
Yeah. Well, because
the other ones
people
are
scared.
Prices.
People think that the way that they, in your article said it really well, stop taking the easy route by cutting your cogs as opposed to the route we need to take, which is increasing prices. The race to the bottom is imminent suicide for our industry.
Yeah, for everybody. Everybody loses.
Yeah, why do you think we don't get that?
Multiple reasons. First of all, is the barrier to entry is so low. That doesn't help. Anybody can get into coffee, and that the fact that there's so much competition from people that are just romantics or artists that want to get into coffee. That doesn't help at all. I think that the fact that we've been very insular as well, we just look at each other and talk to each other doesn't help either.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we've been able to grow by doing that over and over again doesn't help. That's been the constant history, and that's why it was very interesting when I analyzed the average price in the last 50 years versus the last 20 years versus the last 10 years. It's the same. That tells you something about the industry. It's benefited from that cheap price. Everybody knows that, okay, yeah, it's going to go down, right?
I got to ask you there. Why don't producers stop selling? And this is a naive question. I'm going to preface this by saying it. but I'm happy to take one for the team in asking this, because people have asked me this before. Why don't producers stop selling for such low prices?
The reality is that most producers just they're subsistence farmers, so they don't the money that they make from coffee helps them buy things that they don't produce in their own farms. So they
Right.
can live. They have their chickens, they have their pigs, they have beans, they have their veggies, they have eggs. So they can survive. The bare minimum. They can get to a very bare minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Hibernation. They might eat only two meals a day instead of three, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go down to the bare minimum and they can survive, right? If you don't have the luxury, I think I consider a
Right.
luxury to live in a farm.
Education and healthcare and things like that, they don't have access to.
Right. So they don't send the kids to school. They don't buy clothes. Of course they can't buy a new car or anything. So they live with the bare minimum and they've been used to that. So they can hibernate for 2 to 3 years, right? And then they may have some debts. Generally, the debts they have is with their neighbors. So there's nothing they can do to take their money. When they make some money, they pay down their debts, and that's it. They have no savings.
Right.
So it's that's poverty cycle
Right.
that keeps them there, right? If you are living in a city, you just can't not work.
Yeah.
That's not the way it is. But if you have your farm, you can live on the bare minimum, and that's why they keep on producing coffee. They're also waiting for the peaks, right? They also know that
Yeah.
in 5 years they'll pay off their debts, and they'll end up with nothing, but at least they survive, right?
They start
And
the
they know
cycle
that,
again.
yeah. And it's kind of the same thing for maybe roasters. They go ups and downs, and they know that prices will go up to two. Nobody buys coffee when it's high. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
buys at the highs. Everybody waits until the lows, and they say, well, in a year it's going to go back down, so everything's go back to normal.
Well, so if we're asking the cafe owners to just increase their prices, again, this is I'm well aware may sound like a stupid question, but please don't judge me. So if we're saying to cafe owners and to roasters, just increase your prices, why can't we say the same thing to producers?
Because they're price takers. There's millions of small farmers. They
Yeah.
can't say, oh, you have to pay me that, because that's not the way it is. We put the price, and even for specialty, that's the way it is.
Who's we? Who's we?
The buyers.
Why
So,
can't you put the
for example,
prices up?
Caravela has done it,
Yeah.
and yet we get a lot of backlash, right? We lose customers, like
Yeah.
they compare us to the competitors and say, hey, I can get it cheaper. Well, go get it cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
We're not gonna undersell our coffee. That's not the way to value your coffee.
Right.
That's not good business practice.
It's not good business.
And I'd rather not sell that coffee for a loss, because I know if I sell it at a loss, it's taken from the wins.
So, are you finding, is Caravella finding that you get more producers wanting to sell their coffee to you because you pay better prices? Is that one way that you secure your supply chain?
That is one way. One way is paying a good price for coffee, and a transparent price. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of our model, but it's not the only way. You can't only compete with price, and it was easy when we were the only game in town
Mm-hmm.
15 years ago. But today we have plenty of competition in
Yeah.
every market that we operate. So price cannot be your competitive advantage.
Right.
And that's why we also have other advantages, like, for example, education. We have a grow education program called PECA. We support our farmers and help them
Mm-hmm.
in the good and the bad times. But we also allow them to fix their prices. Say, you want to sell at this price? Okay, I'll find you a buyer that is willing to pay you these prices, and hopefully do a long-term contract with you, so that you don't have to worry every single year who's going to buy my coffee and at what price. So we try to offer more than just price, because
Yeah,
price
Salome
alone
Fuentes
cannot
was telling
be.
us about this when she came on the podcast. She's
Yes.
very invested in at least at the time that she was on the podcast, was very invested in these kinds of programs with Caravella, right?
Yeah, you can't run a business just on price. That's the wrong strategy. And value is not just price, and even consumers know it. It's not just about the price. If you get something cheap but it breaks down the next day, that's not a product you're going to continue buying, right? So you
Quality and
have to have,
values mean something.
but it's values, it's also ethics. You know, consumers these days value the ethics of brands. You know, look at
100%.
there's this hundreds of examples of businesses that are highly ethical and do very well and are able to charge more because of their ethics, their brand ethics as well,
Mm,
right?
very
So
much
so
so.
it is. I think Caravela benefits from a great reputation.
Yep.
If anything that makes us able to sell good coffee, and that's something that we tell farmers every day. If I buy this coffee that is not good enough, and then I try to sell it to my customers, we'll lose our reputation, and we won't be able to pay you good prices in the future,
And no one will want your coffee again.
right? So if we do this to help you, oh come, that's just one lot, just help me, just buy it. No, 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 because that one lot can destroy the image and the reputation of this company, and therefore your livelihood in the future. So ethics, principles, how do we change the way and say it's not just price, and it can't be a race to the bottom. It has to be how do we engage with consumers and show them the real value of what we're doing, and that takes time. That's not easy, and I'm not saying you have to raise your prices to by 100% now. You can ramp up prices slowly and tell your consumers, I'm doing this, and this is why you're going to start seeing my prices rise every year or every 6 months. But engage with them and show them why you're doing things. If you always tell the why, I think you do better than just what, right? There's
I
there's a great book.
couldn't agree more. I'm going to cut that last thing that you said out, that last little monologue that you had. I'm going to cut it out and I'm going to post it as a clip on social media. It's simply because it's so important to see and this is where I think if we round the conversation up, this is where I think leadership comes from. The companies that are saying this and doing it and setting an example for the long game rather than the short game.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. There's a great book that I would encourage everybody to read. It's called Start with Why. You start there.
who's the author?
Simon Sinek.
Start
He
with
also wrote
why.
a great book, a follow-up to that work that's called The Infinite Game, that talks about companies that have an infinite vision.
Yeah,
And
nice.
usually the infinite vision doesn't start with making money.
No.
And those are most successful companies than the companies that are just say, I just want to make money.
Yeah. I think that unfortunately what happens is people get into the game of coffee and think that it's going to be highly profitable, it's going to be highly successful, I will be driving a Porsche within a year, and then they get into the reality of it and they now are struggling to find a greater purpose other than a profit margin. And they realize I didn't actually have a purpose behind this. This was something that I did reacting to a life circumstance that I had because I tried to escape the corporate world because I was really good at making muffins and my husband was really great at making pour over coffees at home, and we thought this would be a lot easier. I actually don't give a fuck about my customers and I don't care about coffee. This was supposed to be a lifestyle change. And therein lies that consciousness journey for people at that moment.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, we need more people with a purpose in coffee.
Yes. What a great place to end a fabulous discussion. Thank you, Alejandro. This was really great. Thank you. And
Yeah.
have a great vacation. And we'll talk to you soon. All the links for everybody to get access to the article and to Caravela's social media and website are in the show notes. So thank you again, Alejandro.
Thank you, Lee. It was a wonderful conversation. I hope to be able to meet you in person sometime,
As we
someday.
say in Arabic, inshallah, inshallah. when the world opens back up again, I can't see that happening anytime soon here in Australia, but we will make it happen,
Well, at least we can be in touch.
inshallah. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Have an amazing rest of your day.